December 1944. The skies above England trembled with a sound unlike anything heard before, a low buzzing roar, like a giant swarm of angry bees. Men, women, and children on the ground froze. They knew this sound well. It was the dreaded V-1 flying bomb, Hitler's so-called vengeance weapon. To the Germans, it was the miracle that would turn the tide of war. To the Allies, it was terror given wings, a pulse jet engine guiding nearly a ton of explosives toward London at over 400 miles per hour. Civilians had seconds to decide whether to dive for cover or stand frozen in place, praying the engine cut out before reaching them. For every V-1 that slipped through, entire streets were ripped apart. The goal was simple: to crush British morale, to bleed the Allies dry, and to prove Germany still had teeth. But what the Germans never knew, and what they could never imagine, was that the Allies had a secret weapon of their own. A weapon so advanced it bordered on science fiction. A weapon that would, in a single day, swat down more than 82% of the V-1 bombs hurled across the Channel. It wasn't a new fighter plane. It wasn't a faster gun. It was something hidden inside the shells themselves. The proximity fuse, or as the Americans called it, the VT fuse, was a tiny piece of electronic wizardry that transformed anti-aircraft fire from blind luck into devastating precision. This was the moment when cutting-edge technology met the raw fury of war. And in the blink of an eye, the skies over Europe changed forever. The Germans would never understand how their unstoppable V-1s were falling like flies. And the truth was so carefully guarded that even Allied soldiers firing the weapons didn't fully realize the science at work. This is the story of the secret invention that silenced Hitler's vengeance, saved thousands of lives, and quietly reshaped the future of warfare. By the summer of 1944, the war was turning against Nazi Germany. The Allies had landed in Normandy, Soviet armies were clawing their way westward, and the Reich was being squeezed from both sides. But Hitler still believed he had an ace up his sleeve: the Vergeltungswaffen, the weapons of vengeance. The first of these, the V-1 flying bomb, was unlike anything the world had faced before. Launched from hidden sites in northern France, the V-1 could travel more than 150 miles and deliver nearly 2,000 pounds of explosives. It didn't need a pilot. It didn't need accuracy. Its mission was terror. Every night, Londoners heard the ominous drone in the sky. They called them buzz bombs or doodlebugs. As long as the buzzing continued, there was hope. But when the engine cut out, silence. That silence meant death was seconds away. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Families were buried alive in their own homes. Emergency services couldn't keep up. Between June and August 1944, more than 9,000 V-1s were launched against Britain. Thousands of civilians were killed. For the Germans, each launch was a message: we can still strike you. For the Allies, it was a nightmare. Fighter planes were sent to intercept them, even trying to tip V-1s off course with their wingtips. Anti-aircraft batteries filled the skies with flak, but hitting a small, fast-moving bomb was almost impossible. Churchill demanded results. Every V-1 that got through chipped away at public morale. Something had to change. What no one outside the highest levels of Allied command knew was that, in secret laboratories across America, scientists had already built a device that could solve this problem. A device so radical that its very existence was classified above the atomic bomb. That device was about to make its battlefield debut. By late June 1944, German officers at Flak Regiment 155W were in shock. Reports showed V-1 flying bombs aimed at London were being destroyed at rates no one thought possible. Observers along the French coast watched in disbelief as V-1s were surrounded by explosions, not from direct hits, yet each missile fell broken and burning into the sea or onto the ground. Max Vittel, in charge of the V-1 attacks, could hardly believe the numbers. Interception rates had jumped from 10% to over 50% in just weeks. The Germans tried to explain it with better radar, luck, or improved gunnery, but nothing made sense. Across the Channel, the British had secretly introduced a new technology, the VT, or proximity fuse. This clever device allowed shells to explode automatically when they came close to a target, turning near misses into kills. For the German scientists, seeing their invincible weapon destroyed so easily was baffling. Each explosion was precise, almost like magic, showing the power of science and mass production. Flak bursts formed perfect rings around the missiles, a sight German engineers could not understand. By July, it became clear: their terror weapon, meant to strike fear into London, was failing completely. The skies above England had changed, and German plans were crumbling, defeated not by courage or strategy, but by secret technology, clever design, and factories working at full speed. The story of the V-1's downfall began with American ingenuity and industrial power. The proximity fuse was not just a clever idea, it was the result of massive collaboration between scientists, engineers, and factory workers. Miniature radios, vacuum tubes, and tiny batteries were designed to survive the enormous forces of artillery fire, yet remain sensitive enough to detect incoming missiles. Every shell fired at a V-1 now had a hidden intelligence, detonating at the perfect moment to maximize destruction. By August 1944, the coastal gun belts along southern England had been reorganized. British anti-aircraft guns, guided by the SCR-584 radar, automatically tracked the missiles and fed precise firing solutions. Combined with the VT fuses, the guns became almost unbeatable. On the peak day in late August, German intelligence recorded the impossible. 82% of V-1s launched were destroyed before reaching London. German officers suspected sabotage, miscalculations, or flukes, but tests showed the missiles were functioning perfectly. The truth was far more unsettling. Germany had no idea that their terror weapon was being methodically defeated by technology they could not conceive. Factories in the United States produced tens of thousands of fuses daily, while German engineers struggled to keep up with fewer resources, forced labor, and slow production methods. The result was devastating. V-1s fell like shooting stars into the English Channel or exploded in the air, leaving the Germans powerless to stop the destruction. For Londoners, each explosion meant survival. For the Germans, each report meant confusion, frustration, and growing despair. The war was no longer just fought on the battlefield, it was being decided in laboratories and factories. By late August 1944, the VT fuse had transformed British anti-aircraft defenses into an almost unstoppable force. German observers, peering through field telescopes, watched in disbelief as V-1s tumbled from the sky. Explosions erupted around the missiles, sometimes dozens of meters away, yet they were destroyed every time. German scientists could not explain it. They had calculated probabilities, tested theories, and still, the V-1s were failing. Meanwhile, American factories churned out fuse after fuse. Each miniature electronic device was a triumph of mass production. Millions of tiny tubes, batteries, and circuits engineered to survive extreme forces and activate at the perfect moment. The contrast between German and Allied production was staggering. While Germany struggled with handcrafted weapons, America was producing advanced technology on an industrial scale. The sheer volume of VT fuses meant that every gun could fire multiple intelligent shells, creating a dense kill zone over the southern coast. V-1 launches became a costly failure. German resources were wasted, and thousands of lives were lost in the process. Even when German engineers captured unexploded shells, they could not understand the technology inside. It seemed impossible that such a small device could outsmart their most advanced weapons. For the Allied crews, the proximity fuse was a silent guardian. Every shell fired was an invisible hand protecting London. By the end of August, the interception rate had climbed to an astonishing 82%, a number the Germans could neither believe nor counter. The war was evolving. It was no longer only about bombs or bullets, but about innovation, industrial power, and secrecy that could decide the fate of nations. As September 1944 arrived, the V-1 campaign was a shadow of its former threat. Of the thousands of missiles Germany launched, only a small fraction reached London. The devastation they caused was tragic, but far less than intended. Behind this success was the genius of the VT fuse combined with radar-guided gunfire. The British had created a near-perfect system, detection, tracking, and destruction all working seamlessly together. For every V-1 that threatened London, countless shells had detonated with deadly precision. Yet, the story of the fuse was also one of people, thousands of men and women in American factories who had no idea of the role they played. Long shifts, meticulous assembly, constant testing, and rigorous quality control turned ordinary electronics into life-saving devices. Each fuse was a tiny guardian angel, invisible yet decisive. Meanwhile, Germany was left frustrated, unable to break through despite its elite engineers and massive effort. The Germans had crafted a remarkable weapon in the V-1, but brilliance alone could not overcome mass-produced technology and strategic innovation. The VT fuse proved that modern warfare was not only fought with courage on the battlefield, but with intelligence, industrial might, and ingenuity behind the scenes. By combining science, secrecy, and scale, the Allies had turned what should have been terror into a story of protection, ingenuity, and victory. The V-1s that fell were a silent testament. No matter how brilliant the weapon, innovation at scale always dominates in war. The Germans tried everything to counter the VT fuses. Night launches, varying altitudes, mass salvos, but nothing worked. Each attempt met the same fate: V-1s destroyed with eerie precision before reaching London. From the skies above the south coast, the anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly, guided by radar and triggered by tiny fuses that seemed almost magical. German scientists could only watch in disbelief. They had envisioned their vengeance weapon as unstoppable, yet they were powerless against something they could not even imagine. The secret of the fuse remained hidden, not just from Germany, but from much of the world. Only a few thousand in American factories knew its inner workings, and even they did not understand its full impact. Every V-1 destroyed was a victory of planning, secrecy, and production. The Allies' industrial and technological advantage had turned a terrifying weapon into a futile effort. For every missile Germany built with forced labor under brutal conditions, the VT fuse ensured it was wasted before causing the intended destruction. It was not luck, but science and strategy multiplied across factories and gun emplacements. London skies, once threatened by fearsome new weapons, became a symbol of how intelligence, innovation, and mass production could save lives. In the end, the VT fuse showed that in modern war, the smallest innovations, mass-produced and carefully deployed, could decisively outmatch the most ambitious weapons, no matter how advanced or terrifying they seemed. By September 1944, the V-1 offensive had effectively failed. Of the nearly 9,500 missiles launched, less than 2,600 reached London. Thousands of civilians were spared, but the impact was clear. The Germans had wasted enormous resources on a weapon neutralized before it could deliver devastation. The VT fuse had changed the rules of warfare. No longer did sheer destructive power guarantee victory. Precision, secrecy, and industrial capacity mattered more. The tiny devices that detonated near each V-1 represented countless hours of engineering, testing, and careful planning. Every anti-aircraft battery, every radar station, every factory worker played a part in a silent victory. Meanwhile, German engineers remained in the dark, frustrated by what seemed like inexplicable luck. They had built sophisticated weapons, yet they could not overcome a fuse they never knew existed. This disparity highlighted a profound shift. War was no longer just fought on the battlefield. It was decided in laboratories, factories, and assembly lines, where intelligence and innovation multiplied the effectiveness of every soldier and gun. The VT fuse transformed anti-aircraft artillery from a blunt instrument into a surgical tool of destruction, saving thousands of lives and proving that superior strategy and production could render the deadliest weapons impotent. The Germans, launching their vengeance missiles, never realized that their carefully crafted technology was falling to a hidden invisible enemy: the ingenuity of industrial democracy. The Germans tried everything. They altered launch angles, increased salvos, adjusted altitudes, and even experimented with night attacks. Nothing worked. The kill rate remained devastatingly high. The V-1s, which they had counted on to terrorize London, fell like helpless targets into British coastal gun belts. Every new tactic they devised was countered by the invisible hand of technology. And yet, the Allies never revealed the secret. Proximity fuses remained classified, their true function hidden behind layers of security and careful planning. Even German spies and intelligence officers could not piece together the puzzle. For the scientists and engineers at Peenemünde, the realization was bitter. They had designed what they believed was an unstoppable weapon. Yet, a small, unassuming electronic device made in American factories was neutralizing their creation with alarming precision. The Americans, by combining radar, industrial scale, and careful secrecy, had fundamentally altered the dynamics of war. Each V-1 destroyed was not just a missile stopped, but a lesson in industrial superiority and technological foresight. The Germans had fought with skill, planning, and innovation, but their efforts were overwhelmed by a system that worked on a massive scale, hidden from view, and executed flawlessly. The VT fuse was more than a weapon, it was a revolution in warfare.
And the German never knew it.
By late August 1944, the reality for Germany was grim. Of the 9,521 V-1s launched, only about a quarter ever reached London. Thousands of civilians were spared from destruction, thanks to invisible technology no German could understand. Each missile that fell harmlessly into the sea or was shredded mid-air represented a failure of their entire strategic plan. The Germans had invested millions, mobilized forced labor, and sacrificed countless lives to create these revenge weapons, only to see them destroyed by a device smaller than a loaf of bread. The VT fuze was the silent assassin of Hitler's dreams. For Allied soldiers and civilians, the fuze represented hope, a technological shield that saved cities, minimized casualties, and turned the tide of terror. Even more remarkable was how the secret remained intact. The Germans never captured an intact VT fuze. When American and British engineers observed their own anti-aircraft defenses, they marveled at the precision, understanding that decades of research, industrial power, and teamwork had created something almost magical in its effectiveness. The story of the V-1 campaign wasn't just about missiles and explosions. It was a story of industrial democracy triumphing over tyranny, of tiny components making a massive difference, and of how a hidden advantage could render one of the most feared weapons in the world almost irrelevant. On that fateful day in late August, when 82% of V-1s were destroyed, the nature of warfare had changed forever, and the Germans never knew why. While German engineers scratched their heads, thousands of American workers quietly built the VT fuses that saved London. At factories like Sylvania and Crosley, men and women worked long hours, often unaware of the exact purpose of the components they assembled. Women in particular, working 12-hour shifts, handled delicate vacuum tubes and tiny circuits that would one day destroy a V-1 mid-air. The secrecy was extreme. Workers didn't know that their painstaking efforts would save thousands of lives or change the course of the war. Each fuse had to survive incredible forces, thousands of GS when fired, extreme spinning, and temperature changes. Batteries had to remain dormant for years, then activate instantly. Tiny radios and circuits worked in perfect harmony, ensuring that the exploding shell detonated just meters from its target. Meanwhile, German intelligence remained clueless. Even when they captured proximity fuses, they couldn't comprehend their function. The contrast was staggering. One side had mass-produced genius hidden in plain sight, the other relied on forced labor and sheer brute force. This human story of ingenuity and dedication became the backbone of a technological victory. The VT fuse proved that wars weren't just won on battlefields. They were decided in factories, laboratories, and in the hands of everyday workers who never saw the front lines. Their work, precise and patient, made the difference between destruction and survival. By the time the V-1 offensive ended, these hidden heroes had changed the rules of warfare forever, showing that the combination of human skill, secrecy, and innovation could defeat even the most terrifying weapons of the enemy. By September 1944, the V-1 offensive against London had effectively failed. Out of the 9,521 missiles launched from German ground sites, only about 2,515 reached the city. Thousands of civilians were killed or injured, tragic losses, but the destruction was far less than the Germans had planned. The proximity fuses had reduced the effectiveness of Hitler's vengeance weapons to a fraction of their intended power. German engineers and commanders were stunned. No amount of tactical change, altering altitudes, launching at night, or adjusting salvos, could bypass the invisible shield of technology the Allies had deployed. The V-1, once hailed as unstoppable, had become a liability, consuming scarce resources, diverting labor, and failing to terrorize London as intended. In contrast, American factories churned out tens of thousands of fuses monthly, each one a tiny instrument of strategic dominance. What Germany lacked in mass production, innovation, and industrial coordination became painfully clear. Their so-called wonder weapon was neutralized not by luck or daring, but by systematic technological superiority. Every V-1 destroyed represented a failure of German planning and a triumph of Allied engineering. For the people of London, these small explosions high above the city were silent guardians, unseen yet decisive. The failure of the V-1 campaign marked a turning point in modern warfare, the realization that mass-produced, intelligent technology could overwhelm even the most advanced traditional weapons. It was not bravery or courage that had saved London. It was planning, science, and the relentless power of industrial democracy. Hitler's terror weapons had been stopped not on the battlefield, but in the skies above by tiny fuses engineered in secret laboratories thousands of miles away. The Germans never understood what had destroyed their V-1s. Even when they captured American ammunition dumps containing proximity fuses, they could not recognize them. German scientists were convinced such devices were impossible, tiny tubes surviving massive acceleration, dormant batteries activating instantly, circuits functioning flawlessly after gunfire. Their intelligence failures were total. Max Tell and other commanders suspected improved radar or faster fuses, but the truth was far beyond their imagination. Post-war interviews revealed German disbelief and frustration. They had created advanced weapons, trained elite crews, and launched missiles with precision, yet they were undone by a tiny mass-produced device they couldn't even conceive. The contrast between German and American approaches was stark. Germany relied on craftsmanship, brilliant but limited in scale. America embraced mass production, standardization, and industrial ingenuity. Every V-1 destroyed highlighted this mismatch. The Germans had been defeated by factories, laboratories, and teamwork rather than battlefield heroics. For Allied engineers and workers, the secrecy of the project remained paramount. Thousands of Americans, including women in factories, had no idea of the full impact of their labor, yet they were safeguarding London, protecting soldiers, and shaping the outcome of the war. The V-1 campaign had been a technological and industrial clash as much as a military one. The proximity fuse demonstrated that even the most terrifying weapon could be neutralized by planning, engineering, and production power. While German generals pondered their failure, the real war was being fought quietly in American labs, where tiny fuses spelled the end of Hitler's vengeance campaign. The proximity fuse was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of America's industrial power. While Germany poured resources into complex wonder weapons like the V-1 and V-2, America focused on producing effective technologies in massive quantities. At peak, 40,000 VT fuses were rolling off production lines daily, while Germany could barely match a fraction of this output. Factories across the US, staffed by tens of thousands of workers, operated like clockwork. Every fuse was tested, quality controlled, and shipped with precision. The scale of production was overwhelming. Meanwhile, German scientists, who prided themselves on ingenuity, were constrained by labor shortages, material scarcity, and forced labor conditions. The result was a sharp imbalance. Germany built brilliant but limited weapons. America built millions of effective devices. On the battlefield, this industrial edge translated directly into lives saved. London, under threat from the V-1 campaign, experienced devastation far below what Germany had planned. The combination of radar, concentrated gun belts, and proximity fuses turned every heavy anti-aircraft gun into a weapon of uncanny effectiveness. German calculations of ballistic probabilities crumbled against the reality of American technology. The psychological effect on German commanders was profound. They witnessed missiles falling from the sky at unprecedented rates, but couldn't understand why. The technological mismatch, invisible yet decisive, highlighted a broader truth of the war. Victory depended as much on factories and laboratories as it did on soldiers and strategy. By late August 1944, the lesson was undeniable. Industrial power, ingenuity, and secrecy had reshaped the war, and Germany was already behind, fighting with weapons it couldn't make effective in time. What the Germans never realized was that the majority of V-1s destroyed were killed not by skill or luck, but by a tiny electronic miracle inside each shell, the VT fuse. From a distance, the explosions seemed ordinary, yet they were guided by precise, invisible calculations. As a V-1 approached, radar detected its speed, altitude, and trajectory. The SCR-584 radar system automatically fed this data to the anti-aircraft guns. Then, a shell equipped with a VT fuse, containing a miniature radio transmitter and Theratron switch, waited silently. When the shell neared the missile, the fuse detected the V-1's presence and detonated, sending fragments tearing through the hull. German observers, watching through telescopes, saw the flying bombs tumble from the sky, seemingly without reason. They assumed luck, improved gunnery, or some unknown British trick, but they could not imagine the reality. Every explosion was the result of American science, engineering, and meticulous production. Factories producing these fuses operated under strict secrecy. Workers did not know the purpose of what they built, only that precision mattered. Even a dud shell was immediately secured, preventing any chance of German examination. The Germans never captured a single intact VT fuse during the V-1 campaign. From the sky above England to the factory floors in the US, every step of the process was orchestrated to ensure that the Allies' secret remained intact. By the end of August 1944, this unseen technology had turned the V-1 campaign into a catastrophe for Germany. saving countless lives in London and demonstrating the power of industrial ingenuity over sheer weapon sophistication. By late August 1944, German commanders were in a state of disbelief. V-1's launch toward England were disappearing at rates previously thought impossible. Flak regiment officers ran calculations repeatedly, certain there was a mistake, yet the data never lied. Max Tell and his team tried every tactic, launching at different altitudes, larger salvos, night attacks, even adjusting V-1 speed, but nothing changed. Each attempt ended in the same devastating result: missiles destroyed before reaching London. Panic spread within German research centers. At Peenemünde and other development facilities, scientists faced a bitter truth: the Allies had solved what they considered unsolvable. The very concept of a shell that could think near its target was inconceivable. Germany's own experiments with proximity fuses had failed repeatedly. Miniaturizing electronics, ensuring vacuum tubes survived 20,000 G-forces, batteries that could activate years later. These were problems German engineers could not overcome. Meanwhile, in England, the coastal gun belts continued their deadly efficiency. The combination of SCR-584 radar, VT fuses, and expertly positioned guns turned every approaching V-1 into a high-probability kill. For Londoners below, the sky still threatened with the sound of pulse jets, yet fewer bombs ever landed. Behind the scenes, American industry worked at unmatched speed. Daily production of VT fuses soared to 40,000 units, each manufactured with incredible precision, each representing countless hours of research and labor. While Germany scrambled to understand what had gone wrong, the Allies had already perfected a system that combined technology, production, and secrecy to devastating effect. The V-1 campaign had become a clear demonstration: war could be won not just on the battlefield, but in laboratories, factories, and control rooms far from the front lines. By the end of the V-1 campaign, the results were undeniable. Out of over 9,500 missiles launched, only about 2,500 reached London. The destruction the Germans had hoped for never came. Entire divisions of engineers, pilots, and technical officers were left dumbfounded. They had unleashed what they believed was the ultimate terror weapon, yet it was neutralized not by daring pilots or heroic soldiers, but by tiny electronic devices mass-produced thousands at a time. The proximity fuse, a secret so closely guarded it rivaled the atomic bomb project, had turned the tide of history. In workshops and factories across America, ordinary men and women, some unaware of the exact purpose of their work, assembled components that would save lives and reshape warfare. Each fuse ensured that flak bursts near a V-1 became a lethal force multiplier, reducing the ammunition needed from thousands of shells to mere dozens. Germany's failure to grasp this technological marvel underscored a painful reality: brilliance in a single weapon could not match the power of organized, large-scale production combined with innovative technology. When the war ended, German scientists admitted their defeat. They had not been bested by courage, strategy, or even superior weapons, but by industrial might and scientific foresight. The 82% interception on that remarkable day in August 1944 symbolized more than a tactical victory. It marked the beginning of modern warfare. The lesson was clear: wars would no longer be decided solely on the battlefield. Factories, laboratories, and innovation had become the true front lines. The V-1 may have been Hitler's vengeance, but the proximity fuse had become London's invisible guardian. Germany never discovered what struck down its missiles, and in that ignorance lay one of the most decisive triumphs of World War II.